Caro. Buenos dias, mi amigo. Good morning, friend, and welcome to the Immigrant Whisperer podcast. I'm your hostess, Dr. Janet Awokoya. Today we'll be reading chapter 4 from my dissertation. I am not enough of anything, the racial and ethnic identity constructions and negotiations of 1.5 and second-generation Nigerians. We'll dedicate 2 parts to this topic to give it the depth it deserves. In part 1, we'll delve into the complexities of racial and ethnic identity for these young adults straddling both African and American cultures, from family dynamics to interactions with peers and schools. We'll see how each aspect shapes their sense of self. Have you ever felt this tension of belonging to 2 or more cultural worlds? Hey! You'll find out today, you'll find out today. In this reading, we'll unpack the challenges and triumphs of these students' experiences. This section focuses on how 1.5 and second-generation Nigerian college students experience their African identity in daily life. We'll explore how interactions with family, friends, and teachers shape their understanding of themselves as both Africans and Americans. This chapter highlights the significant role family plays in shaping the identity of 1.5 and second-generation Nigerian college students. We'll see how parental expectations and cultural traditions can both support and challenge their sense of self. In episode 4, part 2, we'll delve deeper into the identity formation of these African immigrant youth, and we'll examine how they navigate social pressures and create their own unique identities. Before I begin reading chapter 4, are you looking for more identity exploration stories? Then check out my captivating novel, Some Black Girls Don't Sit Together in the Cafeteria, and follow the journey of Oluwaseyi, a Nigerian immigrant tackling challenges of identity, academic ambition, and the search for belonging in America. Also, please support Black education and literacy. Purchase a Black Girls and Boys Read t-shirt from someblackgirls.bigcartel.com. Together we can inspire and empower the next generation of Black leaders. The links are in the description below. Now, let's get to chapter 4, part 1, Identity Formation among African Immigrant Youth in Family, Peer Groups, and Schools. Immigrant identity literature has consistently argued that sociocultural contexts significantly impact how identity is constructed and mediated for immigrant youth. Waters, 1999, Yan, 2000. This chapter examines how participants experienced their Africanness in a variety of social interactions with others in their families, peer groups, and schools. I show how others' perceptions of, about, and responses to participants' Africanness within these 3 intersecting contexts had significant social and personal consequences for the participants as they constructed and negotiated their racial and ethnic identities as African immigrant youth. First, I examine the familial context in which participants were raised and elucidate the ways in which participants were ethnically socialized by their parents and extended family members. This section focuses on parental cultural expectations that often required high demands for respecting adults and observing cultural norms and traditions that are often reinforced by extended family members. Second, I focus on the peer group context and the ways in which the African immigrant youth participants interact with their American peers. This interaction was often described as contentious. This section examines participants' understandings of how ignorance about and negative portrayals of African peoples in the Western media impacted how Black American youth in particular responded to them. For most participants, Black Americans comprised the makeup of their peer groups in their schools and neighborhoods and were often the main source for friendship networks. Bailey, 2002, Halter, 1993, Portes et al., 2001. However, most of the participants discussed interactions and relationships with their Black peers as often fraught with feelings of isolation and marginalization. Third, I examined the school context, and particularly the manner in which race and racism played out in the lives of the participants in this context. The study found that in addition to having to reconcile the anti-African sentiment as Black immigrants, participants had to contend with racism like their Black American counterparts. This is specifically addressed in a discussion about participants' interactions with teachers that highlights three major ways in which participants were othered by white teachers and students through exoticism, linguicism, and tokenism. The participants in this study described how they negotiated both their Africanness and their Blackness while simultaneously navigating multiple contexts and the challenges that arose within them, which made their identity constructions complex and multi-layered. The family context. As Nigerian families adapt to their lives in the United States, many parents maintain the cultural traditions, values, and expectations of their respective ethnic cultures. These cultural ways of being are transmitted to their children. Livingston and Sembe, 2003. Parents' insistence on constructing and maintaining African identity and passing down cultural norms and traditions were significant in the lives of participants, and they talked very candidly about the culturally based rules and expectations that their Nigerian parents held for them. Participants were consistent and unanimous in their perceptions of their parents as strict. Amma described her parents as strict in raising me, and Remilekun elaborated on her parents' strictness, saying, "They don't take any BS and they will lay down the law. You better not disrespect that." And so I think they're very, very strict. Parents' authoritative child-rearing practice reflects the importance of respect found in many African families. Participants illustrated strictness in various ways in their discussions of their home lives. Specifically, they explained how their parents enforced cultural traditions in the home. A common experience among participants was the expectation that they properly greet individuals, particularly their parents and other adults. For many Nigerian families, traditional greetings are demonstrations of respect and concern for others. Adeleke, 2006. Within conversations, several participants commented on how they were expected to greet their parents first thing in the morning. Femi explained, "When we woke up in the morning, we'd have to greet our parents by kneeling down, saying good morning." Others reported that failure to properly greet their parents would lead to tensions in the home. For example, Emeka recalled, my parents wouldn't even acknowledge you if you didn't say good morning first thing in the morning. Or my mom would be like, "Good morning!" Very hostile if I didn't say anything. This suggests a child who does not greet her parents is regarded rude and unappreciative. Participants also discussed other expectations by their parents, like being responsible for younger siblings, respecting parents and older siblings, and participating in household chores. Another theme that emerged around parental expectations involved culturally based norms of child adult interactions. Participants discussed their interactions with other Africans, particularly other Nigerians, within their parents' social networks. All recalled that at various points in their childhood and adolescence, extended family members would visit their homes for short visits lasting from 1 to 3 months, or for extended periods, sometimes years, to begin their own lives or to help the family in the U.S. The practice of extended family members living with a nuclear family is discussed by many immigrant scholars who explain that through family and friend networks, many new immigrants to the U.S. find housing, employment, and other opportunities. Bashi, 2000, Pedraza and Rumbaut, 1996. In my experiences as a Nigerian immigrant, it is also common for families and friends to visit each other for birthday parties, naming ceremonies, holidays, and other social events to show support and reinforce community. Participants explained that during these visits, they were told family stories and parents recollected their childhoods in Nigeria and discussed and emphasized customs and traditions. Adesina described the significance of such gatherings. There was a sense of the African community working together. Even though we didn't live near a lot of Africans, we were exposed to a lot of Africans. I guess this is when everybody was in the struggle coming up together. But as a result of that, I was exposed to the get togethers. So I heard the Yoruba music, Sunny Ade and Shina Pitas, the food, the way to greet your elders, kneeling down, and things of that sort. In addition to hearing their parents and extended family stories about Nigeria, some participants shared their own lived experiences during visits to Nigeria. Participants whose families were financially able to visit during school breaks positively described their experiences in Nigeria by saying, "It was amazing. I had a lot of fun and I loved being home." Amma described being very comfortable when visiting both the modern cities and her family's village in Nigeria. She said, "When they took me away from all the richness and everything, they took me to the village. I was very much comfortable. I want to go back." Participants also discussed how certain cultural expectations were heightened during interactions with extended family members in Nigeria and the US. They specifically referenced the African practice of demonstrating respect for and establishing familial ties with biological and non biological adults. In many African cultures, maintaining cultural connections requires the individual, particularly children, to honor adults in the community as their kin. Adeleke, 2006. Essentially, children are expected to embrace adults as extensions of their immediate family and thus must practice behaviors that demonstrate commensurate respect in a variety of ways. One way is by referring to these adults as aunt, uncle, mommy, or daddy, even though they are not biologically related. The reference is generally based on the perceived age of the adult. When an individual refers to a non-biologically related adult with a familial title, it is assumed that they will relate to and care for that adult as if they were a blood relative. Another demonstration of respect for adults in Nigerian culture is gender specific. That is, upon entering the presence of an elder, women are expected to genuflect, which is to bend their knees or kneel down on the ground, and men are expected to bend at the waist in an informal meeting and on more formal occasions to lay prostrate on the ground. In the following quote, Remilekun discusses how her parents transmitted the importance of proper greetings. She said, "We genuflect when people would come that were elders as a sign of respect. And they just always made sure to instill those African values in us because that was something that was tradition. And that was something that they wanted us to know so we could teach our kids later on. So all that stuff was definitely still maintained even though we were here." Likewise, Dio shares the male experience with formal Nigerian greetings when he says, "My parents, they taught us to greet our elders properly. You bend down and you greet your elders, you respect your elders." Raised among Nigerians, I often witnessed that properly greeting adults through words and behaviors is expected to extend beyond the home, particularly in the presence of other Nigerians. According to participants, even if their parents did not enforce traditional behaviors in the home, the expectation that they observe these behaviors existed within the larger Nigerian community. For instance, Abimbola explains that although she was not expected to genuflect to her parents in the home, it was still expected by other Nigerians outside of the family unit. During the interview, she recounted an incident where she did not greet a woman in her church according to tradition. The woman later reported Abimbola's disrespect to her mother. "Abimbola never greets me properly. Do you know how old I am? I have children that are older than her." Abimbola's mother later reinforced the importance of following tradition, particularly with other Nigerian adults. Abimbola recalls, "After that, my mom emphasized that when I see people, I should kneel down or salute them in some type of way." Similarly, Amma explains that in her particular cultural group, Ogoni people were not expected to genuflect. However, her mother did encourage her to do so when she was around other Nigerians who did observe the practice. She explains, "She just wanted me to respect the traditions of another tribe, even though it's not embedded in ours, in addition to display that I was brought up in a respectful manner." Comparisons to U.S. society. Many scholars have explored the challenges immigrant parents face raising their children in the U.S. context. A general consensus in the immigrant scholarship is the Americanization process that happens with immigrant children is often in direct conflict with the expectations of the ethnic culture. Oftentimes, tensions arise in the home when immigrant children resist their parents' heritage culture and traditions. Murray, 2001, Suarez Orozco, 2001. Similar to the experiences of many immigrant youth in existing literature, maintaining Nigerian traditions and values in the U.S. context often proved to be very difficult for the participants in this study. A common discussion point in the interviews was the comparison of their home life to their observations of and experiences in the general U.S. society. Participants noted and elaborately discussed the stark differences between the ways in which they and their American counterparts were raised. They often commented on the representations of American life that was presented on television, as well as the observations and interactions they had with their American peers. The cultural disconnect that they witnessed and frustrations that accompanied that disconnect jointly served as the basis of some conflicts and tensions that occurred in the home. Many of the participants compared their lives to their American counterparts. This was the basis of much conflict in the home. One level of insight into the family context came from the ways in which the students discussed their relationships and interactions with their parents, and the perceptions they had of how Nigerian families versus American families behaved towards one another. Several participants shared that the relationships they observed in American families on popular TV shows ran counter to their own experiences. This was illustrated by Dayo's comment. I guess, like American fathers, they seem to be more like friends and more buddy buddy. But I would say that I didn't have that type of relationship with my father. Ngozi also shares similar interactions with her mother. She explains that parental love was not expressed as freely as she observed with her American peers. In fact, she felt that there was a line of respect that she could not cross with her mother. I was intimidated by my mother. I wouldn't just sit down, hey mom, and crawl in her lap and do things that American kids would. Other participants shared that the behaviors they saw on television and tried to emulate were not met well by their Nigerian parents, and their reactions were strikingly different from television parents. Here, Bumi described an event that occurred when she was younger and influenced by a popular television show. On the Brady Bunch, she explained, they, the actors, used to always slam the door and talk back to their parents. But when I tried to do those things, my parents wouldn't come and hug me or stroke my head. Instead, they'd punish me. She further explained that cultural behaviors were also reinforced by others. For instance, in the absence of her parents, her sister would remind her that she was not American and therefore could not conduct herself in particular ways. I even remember slamming the door once and my sister just yelling at me and laughing and being like, "You're not American! You can't do that!" Similarly, Abimbola explained that on the occasions when she tried to cross the cultural lines, she was quickly reminded by her parents, "You're Nigerian, even though you're in America." I definitely would hear things like that. As participants discussed the issues in depth, it was clear in hindsight that they all felt that they were loved by their parents. Although their parents' physical contact was not as evident as is often seen in American families, the Nigerian parents' expressions of parental love were different and yet still valued by these participants. Parental involvement in social interactions with peers. Several scholars have argued that African parents have a significant influence on their children's peer interactions. Okpelaoka, 2009, McAdoo et al., 2007. For instance, in her study on Nigerian and Ghanaian girls in the United States, Okpelaoka, 2009, found that the parental involvement in peer relationship was used as a means to ensure that their children behaved in respectful ways and maintained the cultural expectations that were taught in the household. Participants in this study shared similar experiences of their parents being actively engaged in their peer relationships. When asked if they believe African families in the U.S. have a different way of raising children than other American families do, several participants responded by discussing how their parents closely supervised their peer social interactions. Ama offers her perspective on the child-rearing practices of her African parents. She said, "I think African families are more involved in their kids' lives than American parents. They don't let their kids stray as much. If there is something that is going on with their child, they tend to nip it in the bud now, right away. They don't wait." Ngozi echoes Ama's thoughts when she said, "I do believe that African parents tend to be a bit more strict, expectations that are much more narrow as far as what's socially and culturally acceptable." Ama and Ngozi's sentiment on the role of African parents in peer interaction was shared by all of the participants in the study. The data reveals several examples of parental attempts at influencing the participants' choice of peers and interactions within peer groups. The two most common attempts discussed by the majority of the participants were during phone conversations and sleepovers. During phone conversations at home, several participants discussed that their discussions were often monitored and/or interrupted by their parents. Emeka and Kunle offered examples of how their parents, and their fathers in particular, would not hesitate to get on the phone and listen in on their conversations. Emeka, he'd monitor the phone so he would know when I was on the phone. So 5 minutes into the conversation, he'd be like, okay, it's time for you to get off. Things like that where I was just like, okay, nobody else's dad does this. Kunle, even when I was younger and I was on the phone or I'd be on the phone, I think I'm talking to a girl or something and I hear somebody breathing on the other line. Hello, Dad? What are you doing for? Shut up! Get off my phone! It's my phone! For all of the participants, there was a non-existent or very limited sense of privacy that many African parents extended to them as children. In West African cultures, many parents believe that they have the right and the responsibility to monitor their children to protect them from actual or perceived dangers. For the participants, however, they often felt that their parents negatively reacted to their interactions with their peers based on stereotypically derived fears. For instance, American children often participate in sleepovers, which basically involve friends sleeping at each other's house for a short amount of time. This practice is not common in West African societies and is generally discouraged, if at all allowed, by Nigerian parents. Amma shares her experiences. I couldn't do a lot of things that other kids could do. I couldn't sleep over in other people's houses. Adesina elaborates on Amma's experiences when she says, there would be birthday parties and sleepovers. My mother was like, you can't go. You don't know what they're doing. So while some of my friends were bonding and making friendships that would last forever, I was in the house. Most Nigerian parents consider sleeping over at others' homes unsafe because they often do not socialize outside of their ethnic groups. As such, not personally knowing the parents of their children's peers creates a sense of mistrust in allowing them to care for their children. Furthermore, permitting their children to interact with parents whose customs and child-rearing practices with which they are not familiar is generally not considered safe parental practice. However, several participants shared that on the rare occasions that they were able to visit their neighborhood peers, their parents had several requirements that had to be met. They wanted detailed information about where the child was going, who was going to be there, and if there was going to be supervision. Remilekun elaborates on her parents' insistence of having supervision when she visited her peers. There had to be some type of supervision. So it wasn't like, just go to your friend's house, it's just you guys alone. No. Adesina agrees when she says, you're like, oh, I'm going to go over to so-and-so's house. There was none of that. Though the majority of the participants were limited in the social interactions they had with their peers, Abimbola mentioned that her parents were much more lenient about her peer interactions when a Nigerian family moved next door. She said, luckily, a few years after we moved here, our next door neighbors were also Nigerian. So they just automatically became our best friends. I spent most of my time at their house because they're a Nigerian family. They had daughters also, and they went to our church. It was easier. I could go there without having to call first and ask. They came here. We slept over each other's house. It was just easier.
there was definitely the same cultural expectations. As shown in Abimbola's quote, her parents were less concerned about her during her interactions with other Nigerians, thus allowing her to freely visit Nigerian friends' home. It is important to note that the participants' complaints about their parents' involvement in their social interactions are really about the parents' interference with their non-Nigerian peers. None of the participants discussed their parents complaining about Nigerian peers, but rather focused mostly on the parents' concerns about their American families and peers and the influences that they could have on their children. The fear that immigrant parents have in losing their children to American ways, which is often perceived as negative, is well documented in the literature of immigrant families. Abdullah, 1999, Suarez Orozco, 2004. The African parents' involvement in their children's social interactions was their attempt to ensure that their children develop friendships with peers of similar values and cultural backgrounds. Unfortunately, many participants did not have significant numbers of African peers in their schools. As such, they relied heavily on their American peers for friendships. In contrast to the family's pride in teaching and imparting Nigerian customs, traditions, and norms to their children, outside Nigerian-centered contexts, participants often felt bombarded by a contradictory and distorted views of their culture, particularly within their peer groups.
The non-African peer group context. All of the participants very clearly connected stereotypes of Africa and Africans to how they were treated by their non-African peers. Participants felt that their non-African peers often associated Africanness with backwardness, primitiveness, and ugliness. They described being persistently stereotyped and derisively teased about their African background and mentioned that they commonly heard the word African slung as an epithet. They discussed being taunted with derogatory names like African booty scratcher and being asked hurtful questions like, do you live in trees or do you wear clothes in Africa? According to participants, much of the teasing and ridicule came from Black American youth, who for many comprised the majority of their classmates and children in their neighborhoods. Participants highlighted two distinctive ways in which negative perceptions were manifest in their interactions with their non-African peers. One, teasing and ridicule, and two, social distancing. Teasing and ridicule. Mass media is a powerful and persuasive force in the U.S. society. In this study, participants discussed how their non-African peers learned, internalized, and often drew upon media depictions in interactions with them, belittling their backgrounds and depriving them of their humanity. Some of their peers' mischaracterizations of Africanness reflected exotic aspects of sub-Saharan life portrayed in the media, like the safari, wildlife, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Pygmies, and the Maasai. Participants felt that these portrayals reinforced stereotypes and were used by their non-African peers to question and ridicule them. For instance, Abimbola explained that she was often asked questions like, do you live in a jungle? And do you live in huts? Likewise, Kunle recalled being asked questions about African food and living habits like, do you have to go catch your food? Do you drink the same water the animals bathe in? Several participants also discussed that when they tried to correct negative perceptions about Africans, it often did not result in meaningful conversations.
For example, Kunle described being approached by a neighbor inquiring about African cooking. "What's that stuff the African cooks?" the neighbor asked. Kunle, seeing an opportunity to educate his neighbor about Nigerian cooking, asked in response, "What's it smell like?" The neighbor responded, "It smells like human being," reflecting images of cannibalism portrayed in media images of Africa. Racially, ethnically, and culturally based denigration is particularly consequential for minority youth during their adolescence because it is a direct attack on the fragile identities that they are in the process of creating in relation to their peers. Graham and Uwonen, 2002. Specifically for African youth, research reveals that cultural abasement evokes individual shame and makes their social interactions much more complicated. Harris and Byrne, 2001. All of the participants talked about how they were teased about what several referred to as the African jokes. Ngozi offered some examples. I mean, everyone heard the African booty scratcher jokes. Living in huts, your food stinks, your name is weird, things like that. In this example, Kunle shared some of the African jokes he heard relating to the low-wage jobs many Africans, despite their advanced degrees, are relegated to in the United States. Batalova and Fix, 2008. He said, "Oh, your dad's a cab driver because he's African. Oh, my mom took a cab this morning and your dad was driving it." Participants also discussed how they were constantly teased about other characteristics like their style of dress, personal smell, hairstyles, dark skin color, their accent, language, the pronunciation of their name, and their cultural traditions, food, tribal dancing, wearing of sandals, etc. Physical characteristics. Several participants discussed how having African physical characteristics was problematic for them, particularly during their younger years as they were still developing their identities. They talked about how their dark skin, full lips, and broad noses were often targets of ridicule by their peers. As Kunle stated, "It's never popular to look like an African." Participants described how physical characteristics that in some way distinguished them from their Black American peers were often the target of ridicule. Several scholars note that oppression over time often results in the duplication of racism and discrimination. Fegan, 2000. Omi and Winnett, 1994. For instance, the Western standard of beauty, which privileges whiteness, has a significant impact on how people of color view their own physical characteristics. Research consistently shows that in the US, Eurocentric features are often viewed as more superior, attractive, and purer than African features. Hall, 1992, Russell et al., 1993. Eurocentric perceptions of beauty have been internalized by many members of the Black American population in the U.S. Hall, 1992, and in this study, participants who possessed pronounced African features described being teased about their physical characteristics by their non-African peers. Ama, for instance, recalled how she was subject to such teasing, which included being called degrading epithets and insults like black spook, black widow, bubble lips, African booty scratcher. I used to get teased, she said, about my lips, about my eyes, about my complexion. Skin color was an issue consistently raised by participants, and the legacy of aversion to dark skin and preference for light skin in the Black American community. Hall, 1992, Russell et al., 1992, appeared to be significant in their lives. Several dark-skinned participants lamented that their skin color was often viewed as a mark of ugliness and a characteristic to be ashamed of by, particularly, their Black American peers. Amma shared, "It bothered me to be dark-skinned because I used to get teased so much." Femi recounted some of the names used against him related to his skin color, saying, "Because I'm dark-skinned, they might say something like chocolate, tar baby, street light, midnight, 2 o'clock, and 2 a.m. Amma revealed that the ridicule she endured for being dark-skinned became so excessive that she felt the need to lighten her skin. She said, "I would actually use bleaching cream, to lighten myself because I didn't like the kids teasing me a lot. I felt I was too dark." She shared that she bleached her skin, particularly her face, from 6th grade through her freshman year in college. And over time, her skin lightened. As a result, the ridicule abated, and she began receiving compliments on her skin, as exemplified below. Interviewer: "Now, when you saw the results, did that make you happy? Did you feel better about yourself?" Amma: "That's a good question. I felt happier. I felt better about myself. I would get compliments about my complexion more too. I noticed that I would get more compliments about my complexion when I used to bleach my skin. When I was young, I would get more compliments. So I did notice the difference. I wouldn't get teased about how dark I was." While perhaps not teased directly about their skin color, one participant with a lighter skin tone described suffering color prejudice as a by-proxy experience. That is, experiencing and being negatively impacted by color prejudice through the teasing of others. For instance, Ngozi explained that her sister's darker skin was an object of ridicule by their peers, and she discussed how she felt that she was able to escape the ridicule experienced by her sister. "I never got the criticism for being dark, My medium, somewhat medium to dark skin, and my hair texture was thicker. It saved me." However, Ngozi experienced guilt and embarrassment as a result of her sister's experience. She said, "And I remember developing for a long time and having a serious guilt conscience, even as an adult, that I didn't suffer through that with my sister." Not only did Ngozi have a sort of survivor's guilt about not having to suffer through this ridicule with her sister, she also felt guilt about her inability to stop the teasing, despite the fact that she often engaged in physical confrontations to defend her sister. As she alluded to previously, despite the guilt, Ngozi felt a sense of gratefulness for having lighter skin, saying, "I was too busy thanking God I wasn't that girl, I appreciated that I wasn't dark, and I won't lie about that." Another less significant but noteworthy issue raised in the interviews was hair. This is pertinent to the discussion on skin color because oftentimes the politics of hair follows the politics of skin color. Russell et al., 1992, page 82. As kinky hair, which is associated with dark skin, is viewed as bad, while straight hair, generally associated with light skin, is viewed as good. Bumi shared how she was often questioned by her peers about her natural hairstyles. Why can't you perm your hair? Several female participants discussed how their hair and their hairstyles were noticeably different from their Black American peers. Remilekun explained, when I was younger, I had low-cut hair. They explained that others often made fun of them because their hair was short and or not chemically relaxed, unlike some of their Black American peers, because their mother used bright barrettes and or uncoordinated hair accessories, or because they wore African hairstyles. These noticeable differences, they felt, were often viewed as ugly and were subject to ridicule. Ahmad discussed the Nigerian practice and school policy of cutting schoolgirls' hair short and not chemically straightening young children's hair. These practices, observed by her mother, was trying to maintain and pass on the traditions of her culture to her children, caused Amma a great deal of shame and frustration in the U.S. context. She shared that excessive teasing about her hair would often lead to fights with her school peers. She explained that she begged her mother to stop cutting her hair. I was like, Ma, I can't go to school like this because I'm being teased. She went on to explain how, after substantial protests from her and incessant calls from a teacher who was concerned about her declining academic performance and her contentious interactions with her peers, her mother eventually stopped cutting her hair. Participants interpreted teasing and ridicule, which occurred on so many levels, as an attack on who they were as human beings. As Ngozi stated, it's not just those stupid insults. I mean, it hurts because it's also a part of your identity. Although many participants could and did change more superficial features like hairstyles, the core characteristics that define them, e.g., physical characteristics, cultural traditions, language, could not be changed. Most participants felt that the teasing went far beyond individual insults and was an attack on their culture and their people. As Amma aptly stated, we used to get teased because of who we are, because we're African.
Ooh, Amma said it. I didn't say it. I'm just reporting it. Don't shoot the messenger, friends. So that wraps up part one of chapter 4. We hope this episode gave you new insights into the complexities these young individuals face. Stay connected for part 2, where we'll continue our deep dive into their experiences. Let's stay healthy with Zucosa Fitness. Movement is vital. Visit our sister channel, Zucosa Fitness, for quick, energizing workout routines. Thank you for tuning in to the Immigrant Whisperer podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time. Peace.